Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Today we are joined by Michela Wrong, as you were notified. So, Michela, thank you. Welcome back to East Africa Daily. Thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you for inviting me, Jean-Paul.
Oh, the pleasure is mine. So thank you. And so I'm gonna be brief. I'm not gonna delay. I'm going to ask you a question regarding the Asylum UK asylum deal. This is the reason why you and I agreed to talk today. So I hope you can help us understand what is going on with the UK-Rwanda Asylum Treaty and what is in the deal that is really making the UK, United Kingdom, risk its or her reputation on human rights?
Um, I think, I mean, here in the UK, pretty much, for the last week, this was the only thing that people were talking about. And for me, I've been writing about Africa for 30 years, and it was very curious because there was all this talk about Rwanda, Rwanda, Rwanda. But what was very striking is the talk was not about what's going on in Rwanda, what conditions are like in Rwanda, what Rwanda's relationship with DRC is like, the role that Rwanda plays in the Great Lakes. The discussion was really about British politics. And so this deal has become the core and the sort of trigger for a massive sort of dispute within the Conservative Party, the ruling party here, the right-wing Conservatives, between the extreme right of the party and the centre of the party. And so the extreme right of the party wants a very, very tough deal that means that essentially Britain, which has already left Europe under Brexit, European Union, that Britain would also leave the European Court of Human Rights. And so it would just send people to Rwanda. No appeal would be possible that made any reference to the European Court of Human Rights. The centre of the party instead is saying, we don't want to do that. That would mark an end of a whole history of
When you
human
say the
rights
center of the party, it means it's within the Tories, but
within the right-wing Tory party. There
okay,
is a central group, and
okay,
then we do not want to go down this route. This actually would make us a kind of pariah nation within Europe, and it would mark our complete separation from the European Union. So this is a philosophical debate that in a way is very, very connected to the debate that we had in this country about leaving, about Brexit and leaving the European Union. And it really, Rwanda just happens to be the topic on which this debate has kind of crystallized. So it's very, very frustrating. And it's a debate about, immigration and Britain's attitude to immigration and right-wing voters' attitude to immigration. And so what you hear is a lot of debate in which there's very little information and very, very little background knowledge. And now we have a new law that was signed after our new Home Secretary, James Cleverly, flew to Kigali, signed this new deal with Vincent Biruta, the foreign
yes.
minister. And the new law declares, as though saying it is enough, the new law says Rwanda is safe. The fact is that the highest court in Britain, the Supreme Court, in October, said exactly the opposite, that Rwanda was not a safe place to send refugees. So essentially what you have is a right-wing government and a right-wing party, which is trying to defy the court, the highest court, the Supreme Court, and say that just because it declared that Rwanda was not a safe place to send asylum seekers doesn't mean it's true. So it's an extraordinary position. I think really at the heart, it is about a political party that is tearing itself apart at the seams. What we know is we have an election coming up in the UK next year. That many people in the Conservative Party believe that they will lose the election, and that at that point, Rishi Sunak, our Prime Minister, will stand down. And then, there is a sort of a feeling that the right wing of the party might then come to the fore and try and seize leadership as they went into opposition. And so this is really about people lining themselves up so that they can lead the future Conservative Party after they have lost the elections next year, because everyone anticipates that the Labour will win the elections.
So before we get to the election, because that is probably a year from now, isn't it?
It weren't probably not as long as that, because in fact people were saying, that we're
Okay.
likely to have an early election, partly because of this crisis, because so many questions have been asked of Rishi Sunak and his leadership, and there's such a sense of crisis within the Conservative Party that people recently were talking about an early election, maybe as early as March. So anything
That's
can happen.
interesting. Yeah,
Yeah.
well, that is very interesting. So the you just well touching on the contra I mean the conflict between the United Kingdom Supreme Court and the Parliament. So the Supreme Court had evidence related to how unsafe Rwanda is,
Yes.
and they ruled on that. And the Parliament said Rwanda, we have to say that it's safe, but they don't believe it is safe. But can they do that?
Well, it wasn't. Well, what happened is the government, which is
Right.
a conservative government, drew up this bill which says Rwanda must be announced and decreed to be safe.
Yes.
Parliament then had a vote on this, and everyone expected there to be a big revolt of conservative deputies, members of parliament, and that in fact at that moment Rishi Sunak and his leadership might be challenged. In the end, all of the rebel deputies who had said they would vote against did not, but many of them abstained. So they just didn't vote. So that was their quiet way of showing they weren't happy. But what is due to happen is, I think a lot of people in Africa think, okay, now the bill has passed. That is by no means the case. The bill will have a second reading after Christmas in January. And what will happen then is we will see this clash between the right wing of the Conservative Party and the centre, and it will come up again. And Rishi Sunak, the Prime Minister, has promised things to both sides, and he can't, he cannot deliver to one side if he delivers to the other side. So, everyone's been told that, their needs and their desires will be met, but it's impossible for him to do that.
Yeah.
So that could be a massive
I hope
crisis.
so.
Yeah, a massive crisis in his leadership. After that, our system, our parliamentary system, means that the bill would then go to the House of Lords, our second house, our upper house. And the House of Lords has a long track record of intervening, especially on these kind of issues, which it sees as being about Britain's constitutional relationship with basic fundamental human rights legislation. So they are expected to interfere at that stage. Once that stage is over, if we imagine that the bill goes through that stage and still is in something approaching its current form, the bill will then be open to legal challenge. And these lawyers who work for the NGOs and the asylum seekers who don't want to go to Rwanda will then try to contest the bill in court. And this is, so this is a very long road we are on. And, at the end of this, it is not clear to people like me that any asylum seekers will ever get on a plane. And the thing that a lot of British voters are concerned about and rather amazed at is that we have apparently already paid quite as much money as we have to Rwanda without a single asylum seeker getting on the plane. So the amounts of money just keep going up. I mean, originally it was 140 million pounds.
Now,
Then it was no, it was 120 million pounds. Then it was confirmed that it was 140 million pounds. And recently we heard that it was actually 100 million pounds more than that.
wow.
So we're up to 240 million pounds. And then by next spring, we were told that another 50 million pounds would be paid. And a lot of people are saying, why are we learning this after the money is paid? What is this being spent on?
That is my question as well.
We have not a single asylum seeker being sent to Rwanda. So why do you need to send, what it will amount to 400 million pounds? It's a lot of money. And I think, that the anger about that will rise as the months go by. And people are going, this has not been at all transparent. This is a kind of stitch up. And this is our money you've been spending in a country where, in the end, a lot of people are convinced that no asylum seekers will ever be sent.
So why do you know that you are convinced that no asylum seeker is going to be sent and the UK government doesn't see that? That's why my suspicion was something to do with the money. Maybe they are doing something, um, sending money to Rwanda, maybe something fishy. Because I did follow the debate
Yeah.
in the UK Parliament. It was very, very entertaining. I think very entertaining. And then some point, the commentators after that, they said, it's the bill or the law that you just mentioned was like declaring that all dogs now, I mean, all dogs are cats.
All dogs are cats, yes. Or yeah.
You can't make them
No,
cats just by signing or
no.
voting that they
Yeah,
became, they
you
just,
cannot decree something into being. Um,
so,
uh, yeah,
So why is the government of the UK doesn't see that the asylum seeker will never go to
I
Rwanda
I don't think
or
money
might not?
is the issue. I mean, I don't think the Conservative members of Parliament that you're talking about stand to gain from this deal. I think what is at issue are political ambitions. And as I said, I think it's people who are looking ahead and thinking, when we go into opposition, who's going to be running this party? And that means that a lot of people have identified future leaders, people they think will be future leaders, like perhaps Suella Braverman on the right, the
Right.
former Home Secretary who was very keen on this bill. A lot of people think she might emerge as the leader. And so they want to side with her so that when she takes over, they will get ministerial or important positions in government. So I think it's about ambition rather than money. But I think, to a
But
lot
if
of
if you are based like a UK, I think because you have in the even minister they are appointed, but they come from the MPs, right?
well, the prime minister, yeah, you have to
And
be a
MP.
usually, although the foreign minister at the moment is a member
Oh,
of the House of Lords, David Cameron.
okay. But you
Yes,
have to be elected.
yes, yes.
So if you're going to go to if the constituency doesn't really like the deal, so does that mean that your political ambition will be satisfied? Are you going to to get it?
Well, the thing is, I think the trouble is when you come to an election, constituents always vote on a whole panoply of
Right.
issues. Obviously, immigration is supposed to be a very important issue for right-wing voters. It's the one
Right.
they're constantly being told about. They're being presented with the idea that this is a real crisis, that something has to urgently be done, that Britain has been invaded. I mean, that was the words that Suella Braverman was using. So they mind about that, but they also mind about things like the National Health Service. They mind about inflation. They mind about mortgages, and they also mind about they look at their leaders and they think who they trust. So I think there's a wide range of issues. So I mean I think although this discussion is all about Rwanda, it's really about the individual political ambitions of some of the key players in the Conservative Party.
And no money, no money. They're not hiding money to Rwanda. And
No,
no.
but I think uh, talking about the money,
Yep.
our development secretary Andrew Mitchell, as you know, is a great admirer of Paul
Oh,
Kagame.
Kagame.
He's
Yes.
never hidden that. He's always spoken out in his defense. He likes to visit Kigali, and I think his determination when he was made development secretary, because he had not had that position for a while, was he definitely wanted to boost the aid budget of Britain. And one of the countries I'm sure that he saw receiving more aid would be Rwanda.
Rwanda, obviously.
So
Yeah.
the asylum deal has allowed Rwanda to receive a lot more, of British financial support than it would have done otherwise. And what we've seen, and you may not be aware of it, but in recent years, the aid budget of Britain had really shrunk because there was a feeling that Britain could not afford the big aid budget it had before. So aid to Rwanda, aid to Ethiopia, aid to Uganda, all these countries had been cut in a fairly dramatic way. So this deal has allowed, Rwanda to have the kind of aid that it was used to, the aid levels from Britain that it was used to in the past. And I'm sure Andrew Mitchell is quite happy to see that taking place because he thinks Rwanda deserves more aid.
And that is does not disturb, I mean, concern you based on
Oh,
the
as
Rwanda
an,
involvement
uh,
in Congo, that they might be using
it
UK
certainly
money?
it certainly concerns me
Right,
because I am someone who's been following events in the Great
because you
Lakes.
know, yeah,
And I'm very well aware that Rwanda's, has been clearly identified as supporting the M23, that the M23 is creating, a huge refugee crisis, a displaced people's crisis in Eastern Congo and destabilizing the whole region. And I would be very much in favor of cutting all aid. I
yeah,
think the West should cut all aid to Rwanda because that was what happened in 10 years ago when the M23 was getting out of control in Eastern Congo. And what happened is the donors, the Western donors, the IMF, the World Bank got together and cut aid to Rwanda. And suddenly the M23 problem that had been so massive seemed
absolutely.
just faded away very, very quickly. And I would love to see exactly those steps being taken. But I see that is not happening. And I think the asylum deal is one of the reasons that's not happening because the US, the UK, the EU, France, they're all got different agendas at the moment, different interests, and they're not agreeing. And it seems to me obvious that they should be talking about and agreeing to really severe sanctions on Rwanda for what it's doing in Eastern Congo.
And what about the Good Friday uh, agreement? They do say, I heard that the Good Friday is something that was signed like in 1998. Is it Northern Ireland? And is it
Sorry,
Northern Ireland?
yeah, that's a Northern Ireland agreement.
Yeah,
Um,
the US was concerned that
yeah,
if the UK withdraw from the European Human Rights Court, uh, then it's going to affect that agreement.
yes,
So,
because the European Human Rights Agreement is sort of at the foundation of the Northern Ireland Agreement.
okay.
And I think the US was making a very valid point, and I think plenty of people on the moderate wing of the Conservative Party are well aware of that element, that factor, and that would be one of the reasons why they would be really, really adamantly against the idea that Britain leaves the European Court of Human Rights just in order to send some token asylum seekers to Rwanda so that it can look tough on immigration. And they feel
Yeah.
that is not the route to go down. So, yeah, this is a very complicated issue and there's a lot at stake. And what we're seeing at the moment is a political party and some leaders, some prominent members of that party who are just thinking in terms of their own career prospects and really not thinking of the consequences, the long-term consequences for Britain or for Africa.
And more concerning is that this bill, even though we understand it may not go anywhere, but it passed after the human rights report. That was that was a big report with lots of bombshell
Yes,
and
you're talking about the Human Rights Watch report
Human
on
Rights Watch. And
transnational
to see
repression.
this bill
Yeah,
go through, even though
yeah,
it's not it's an early stage, but still,
yeah.
my question is going forward, how does UK criticizes another country on a human rights violation anywhere in the world? Never mind Rwanda.
Yes, no, I agree. I mean, I think it was astonishing that we are talking about a new bill after the publication of Human Rights Watch's report, a
Right.
115-page report. I read it. I wrote about it
Huge report,
on
detailed.
Rwanda's record on transnational repression, and the
Yes.
way in which Rwanda's agents fan out across the world to target dissidents and human rights activists and journalists. And, as you know, this is the subject of my book, Do Not Disturb. So I mean, what the interesting thing about the Supreme Court ruling was that it had given a very succinct but quite critical assessment of Rwanda's human rights record. And I welcome that because it was a very, it was quite short, but it was a kind of like, this is a country with human rights issues, a significant one, and it also mentioned this track record of killings of dissidents, exiles. It also talked about the politicization of the judiciary in Rwanda and the fact that the judiciary could be lent on and interfered with politically. And that's very important if you're considering, legal processes involving asylum seekers. So I think anyone who read that report would not be able to say this is a safe country. And one of the points I've been making when I give interviews to British media outlets is, you keep talking, is it safe for refugees? And for me, the question is Rwanda safe for Rwandans? We just saw in The Guardian, Victoire Ingabire, the former opposition leader, saying that she feels that she's in danger, that she is, because she gave an interview to The Guardian, because she also gave an interview to the BBC's Hard Talk programme, she feels that her life is in danger. She's picked up rumours, she's heard reports of what's being whispered, and she feels afraid. And you kind of think, setting aside the whole refugee issue, is Rwanda a safe place for Rwandan journalists, Rwandan opposition people, Rwandan activists, human rights activists, for Rwandan normal citizens? That, for me, that's the bigger question.
And they do know that we can't even protest. So if you cannot protest and express your disagreement with the government policies or approach on anything, so how do you trust that whatever government is telling you it is true? The Ingabire Victoire was one of my questions. So I was wondering whether that will make any difference in terms of how this bill proceeds. So because they do know now, The Guardian wrote about it, and I did follow her interviews on Channel 4 and on Hard Talk, and so I think it is concerning. But do you think the UK government can protect her? Maybe the embassy?
I think that what we can expect from the UK embassy in Kigali is complete silence, because this policy, the asylum policy, is so politically important to the government here in the UK that the ambassador in Kigali and his diplomats will not be doing anything that could be seen to jeopardize that agreement. And this is in accordance with what we've seen, which is that ever since Priti Patel, the former Home Secretary, signed the deal with Vincent Biruta, the original deal, Britain suddenly went silent on human rights issues in Rwanda. Up until then, it had been, a very understanding, very supportive foreign partner of Rwanda's, but it did nonetheless occasionally issue statements in which it raised concerns about torture in detention centers, about extrajudicial murders, about the treatment of journalists, about disappearances. And it did so during international meetings, a UN meeting, periodic review of Rwanda's human rights in Geneva was one of the places that it aired those concerns. And, if you look at the record of UK statements since, it's been completely silent. So I'm afraid, you raised this point earlier, Britain has really done itself a lot of damage by embracing this policy, because in the eyes of the world, this is a shabby deal. It's a deal that doesn't make Britain look good. It makes Britain look as though
one of the African countries, really, because you see, like, I was wondering how they're going to criticize dictators who are saying that we're not going to be part of ICC agreement. And you're saying that we're going to withdraw ourselves from something that is named after human rights, really. And they said they can't criticize anybody anymore.
No, but I would just say to you, this firstly, the deal has not gone through. The bill
Yeah,
has not the bill has not been adopted. It is not yet legal here.
right, right,
It is,
right.
it is at the moment just a proposal. There are many people who don't think it will ever go through. We have a court system that luckily, in contrast with what happens in Rwanda, stands up to the government and challenges the government. We have lawyers who stand up and challenge the government with great success. So I would just say, I would hope that African countries and African citizens make a distinction between what is done by a political party, which happens to be in government, and probably won't be in government for very much longer, and the United Kingdom as a nation state.
So the you covered, I mean, you have a very good, very well understanding about Rwanda. You wrote two books. Of course, one was two books about Rwanda. You may have wrote
Well,
more, but I
actually, the
know
first
two.
one was about Congo, huh?
Oh, the first, no, I'm talking about the Do Not Disturb.
Yes, but
Is
there's
that's
only
not
one book. There's Do Not Disturb, and then there's the French translation. It's the same book,
Do Not, oh, it's the same book. Yeah, sorry, but so
right?
it's
Just in a different language.
different language. So the your knowledge about this the Rwanda is really it is quite remarkable because it's quite remarkable because of the details in the book. There are a lot of things that I read in a book that I did not know about my country.
Really?
Yes. Well, I can't tell you, but I remember the incident in Tanzania, for instance. I
Right.
don't remember like vividly, but I do know that there is something that I learned. And I used to speak with kind of Patrick Arigea, but I never knew a lot of things about,
Mm,
that was taking place. There are a lot of
mm,
things Rwandans especially, well, a lot of Rwandans, I should say, a lot of them, because I do think that I should know, I do know enough to
mm,
understand Rwanda. But then after reading your book, I said, I didn't know about this. And so the question is, because you are a former journalist,
mm. I think I'm still a journalist,
you still
Jean-Paul.
you're a
I'm a
journalist,
journalist who writes books on the side.
and
Yeah.
you worked for BBC.
I worked for Reuters news agency first, and
Yes.
then I used to be a freelancer for BBC when I was
Okay, that's
living
yes.
in Kinshasa, and I was doing Reuters and BBC, and then I worked for the Financial Times, the business newspaper here.
So do they listen to you or people similarly situated to, your background about, because I know the Rwanda, Congo, or Ethiopia. I think you also wrote a book about Ethiopia.
Eritrea. Yeah,
Okay.
Eritrea.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So my question is, even though that I understand you saying that this is not going to go anywhere, and we are hoping, and with we are hoping it doesn't go anywhere, because
Mm,
this is um, not only is it doesn't take into the account of the Rwanda itself where they're sending these people to, but also the immorality, like how this bill or this deal is really immoral. And you remember Businge,
mm,
Johnson
mm.
Businge,
Yeah.
on well, it was an undercover by
A
operation
thing.
by led
Yeah.
by donkeys.
Yes.
He did say that. He did criticize UK government. He said this is immoral. And
Mm,
why can
mm.
they, if they can't listen to you, why can they not listen to Businge?
Well, because I'm a journalist, I'm not a politician, and I don't,
But you're an expert on the issue, aren't you?
Yeah,
You could be.
yes, but
Yeah.
there are people who would challenge my analysis and don't share my views, and they also have influence. And above all, I think often, what journalists like myself or writers like myself find on many of these topics, not just Rwanda, but also I had a lot of criticisms of British policy over Eritrea, for
Hmm.
example, and Ethiopia and Kenya, because I wrote a book about corruption in Kenya. And I was pretty critical in all, though, because that's your freedom as a journalist. You can say, I think my government's policy really stinks. And then often, you will talk to the people, whether they're diplomats or whether they're officials, and they'll say, well, you have a point, but the reasons we're not going to do what you recommend are as follows, and they are often reasons of realpolitik. We're not going to do this because the way the world doesn't work along the lines that you suggest. So as a journalist, you'll often say you should be applying the law, or you should be respecting human rights, and they'll be going, yes, but if we do that, we'll make an enemy of a very important country that is a trusted ally. And in Rwanda, Britain has several interests at the moment. So one of them is the asylum deal, but that isn't the only interest that Britain, by being silent on Rwanda's human rights record,
Maybe
is.
that explains why. So what is the other
Well, the
interest?
other one is, the role that Rwanda plays in peacekeeping, sending peacekeeping troops around Africa. And there is, people should not forget how worried the West is by the spread of Islamic Jihad
Yes.
across Western Africa, and the way in which what they're seeing is civilian governments being toppled in military coups, because there's so much unhappiness amongst the publics in these countries by the fact that people are being slaughtered in the north by Islamic jihadist extremist rebel movements. And that there's a spreading tide of instability in Western Africa. And, we see also jihadist movements who have been active in Eastern Congo, Northeastern Congo, who have also been active in Central African Republic and in Mozambique. And to all of these places, Rwanda is stepping forward and saying, we can solve this for you. We will send our disciplined soldiers, and that they're very good at taking orders and they do what they're sent to do. And so that's another interest, and that's an interest that matters, to Britain. It also has a lot of resonance with the United States, and as we know, with France, which has a large liquefied gas
Mozambique.
installation
Yep.
in Mozambique, which is being protected by Rwandan troops. So that's also another reason why the attitude to Kagame will be, yeah, we know what he does. We know he rigs elections. We know he kills people abroad. We know he sends agents. We know he sends death squads. But that's nothing to do with us. We know that he jails opposition leaders and that he kills journalists, and they die in mysterious accidents that nobody really believes are accidents. But he's an ally, and nowadays the new Cold War in Africa is not between communism and capitalism. The new war that everyone worries about is the war between liberal Western sort of democracy and Islamic jihadism.
Yep.
So I think that's also a reason why you see a real failure to take action against Paul Kagame.
And it's so sad because even the way he sends those military to assignments is just himself. That's nothing I did witness. I heard him talk in front of the parliament. He said, "Oh, if you didn't know, we have soldiers here and here. I think that is important for you to know." So they don't get involved. I'm
Well,
not kidding. It's in front of the parliament. If he had said it in front of, let's say, reveal that on an interview, that stuff, that's you could say, yeah, it's Kagame. But in front of his own parliament, he doesn't think he should inform them about that. He's sending a military. So we have this much in this many in Central Africa. We have this many in Mozambique, and those in Central Africa, they don't get paid by anyone. So we share the money that is received from the UN, and then they share the split with those that we sent that are not part of the UN mission. And he said, I think that is something you should know too.
Well, it was nice of him to brief them. But I mean, I don't think anyone.
After 2 years, probably after the deployment. So after 2 years or maybe a year after.
This is the way Rwanda is run. Yeah, I mean, this is what you call the concentration of power in one man's hands, and it's taken a really extreme form now in Rwanda. I don't think it used to be like that 10 years ago.
Well, and no, well, but it's getting, because as you said, I can't even say it, because he's been in power for 30 years. So they're
mm,
not going to criticize him for staying in power forever
mm,
because they need him. And then
mm.
sometimes we do criticize our own, or we criticize ourselves
Yeah,
because people call him an agent of the West. But we say that is an excuse not to do
mm,
what we're supposed to do, because if we continue to blame others, then we're not going to take responsibility
yeah.
and do what we're supposed to do.
So what
But
what
that
I
is
some-
true, though.
yeah,
It seems true.
what I sometimes say to people when they say he's an agent of the West and it's all the West's fault is one of my first jobs in Africa was I was based in Kinshasa. I was
Right.
working for Reuters and the BBC, and I saw the end of Mobutu, right? And he too, was always like, I used to have conversations with Congolese and they say we can't get rid of Mobutu because oh, the army is too strong. Well, the army wasn't strong at all, as we saw.
Never thought there is no way to,
As
there
we
was
saw
no
in
way to assess
1996,
that. Yeah.
not strong at all. But also, they would say, well, he's imposed on us by the West, and we can't get rid of him because of Western support. And, the point I would always make is the West will react to what the Congolese people want
That's right.
when they see that Mobutu has no support, no power, and that people are, out on the streets demonstrating every single day, maybe, they will shift their support because the West just wants stability and they want partners, and they don't really care if those partners aren't Democrats, but they do want people who they think are strong and who can be reliable collaborators. And the idea that that an African population has to just sit there and take it. I mean, I think that's not the way it worked. What we saw with Mobutu was this incredible weak leadership that, in a way, it was like its bluff was called when the AFDL, which was the rebel movement supported by Rwanda, just started walking across the country, and it just all collapsed like a house of
Remember
cards.
that.
Uh,
Yeah.
but it was kind of like it was an empty shell, and there was nothing inside the shell. And that's what you tend to get with these systems in which people think, oh, we can't get rid of, and there's a moment, we saw this with Ceausescu, we saw this with Saddam Hussein in Iraq, where suddenly these men, these leaders who looked so powerful and absolutely unmovable, and, we can't do anything about them, they were gone incredibly quickly. And I think that happens because at the end of the day, what happens is there's huge unpopularity that builds up that doesn't find expression, and and it's suppressed, and people are all very, very unhappy with the leadership, but they won't say anything. They don't say anything, and then they can finally there'll be a trigger, and then the extent of unpopularity becomes clear to everybody, and then it's the beginning of the end.
And to be fair to Mobutu, because I was born in Congo, I know I agree with everything you've said, but we did not live in fear. Like in Rwanda, Mobutu did not go after poor people. In
Mm.
Rwanda, it's a terror. Like people are terrified, or terrorized by the government. Even poor people, they are, they know, they fear Kagame. But in Congo, if you're a politician, probably will be, I don't know, under
Well,
Mobutu.
I mean, with Congo is so different because of its size, and the fact that there was a kind of laissez-faire system of running it.
Right, right.
Mobutu, whatever he was like as a young man, by the end, he was spending his days in Badalite and letting his generals run the country. And I would agree with you that the average Congolese citizen did not feel that Mobutu was looking over his shoulder,
No,
and that everyone was watching him, and he couldn't even talk to his neighbors and say what he thought of Mobutu without worrying that the police, or the security forces would be at his door. Rwanda is a much smaller country. And it's very, very carefully monitored. And I think the average Rwandan citizen is very aware that
oh yeah,
if he shares his honest opinions in the bar, he might find
that's
that
it.
a local official might be knocking at his door the following day. And so I think it's a completely different atmosphere and a different kind of relationship between the citizen and the state.
And back to the deal, because I don't know how much time we have left, because I mean, we can talk about this as for as long as you know you have. But
Until cameras come in.
there is an interesting question that was sent by one of our viewers. Said the uh, the UK seems like to give credit. I mean, they say they because they have a law. I mean, maybe let me play this
Uh-huh.
if you want. It's if I can find the audio because I struggled before. But in the meantime, um, if Rwanda does not if Rwanda does not follow her own constitution according to this
Yeah.
to the viewer's question. So how can the UK rest assured that they're going to follow whatever they are signing if they don't even follow the constitution?
So I think that's a very good point. And
Yeah.
one of the things I found ridiculous about the last week was that at a certain stage, Rwanda warned Britain, the British government, that it couldn't break international law. And so the British government should not force it to do anything that meant it could break international law. Well, I mean, I'm sorry, but what Rwanda has been doing in Eastern Congo, supporting the M23, sending its soldiers in, and also not just supporting the M23 and sending them into Eastern Congo and arming them.
What about Rusesabagina's case?
Its own troops have been inside the country, right?
The Rusesabagina's case is kidnapping across borders,
Exactly. And
killing of Patrick
what
Karegeya,
about
Book.
sending killers to bump off, Patrick Karegeya and try and kill General Kayumba? I mean, these are violations of international law. So the idea that the Rwandan government should be lecturing and giving the British government lessons on, saying, well, we couldn't be seen to violate international law. I mean, I was just listening to it, I was thinking, this is so ridiculous. But, again, one of the problems we have here is most journalists don't know anything about the Great Lakes. And so there was a marked failure, and neither do most members of parliament. So there's a marked failure for anyone to bring up this rather pertinent point when Rwanda got on its high horse and said, we couldn't break international law. I thought it was extraordinary.
And also it's the fact that they said Rwanda is playing a higher moral ground.
Giving us lessons, that it's like, oh my God.
And to be honest with you, if this deal was between Kenya, although you wrote extensively about the corruption in Kenya, but if it was between Kenya and UK, not because I'm not from Kenya, but I think I would understand it because I think it's a country that has democracy. They can challenge anything legally if they are unhappy. And I think the average citizen in Kenya, I mean, they are educated, they understand their rights.
Yeah.
Some mostly in
Yeah. I think you're right.
Rwanda, based on all these, the human rights reports after reports, and for UK to proceed, I mean, the government, I understand it's not the entire UK. We are hoping that the next election is going to be a referendum vote, like to kick them out because of this particular deal. But it doesn't make sense at all.
No, but also, I mean, one of the details which we haven't discussed is under the new deal. I think you probably followed that Britain is supposed to be sending out judges, British judges and Commonwealth judges to Rwanda to process the cases. And this is meant to meet the concerns that the Supreme Court raised about Rwanda's asylum process, that it was
right. And who's going to be interpreting for these people?
Well, firstly, I would like to know, where are these people going to come from? Who's going to be paying for them? Because in my experience, judges are quite expensive, and they expect their pension plans to be paid. But it's also like, my understanding of Rwanda's judiciary is it's highly, and this was said during the Supreme Court ruling.
Okay.
The judicial process is highly politicized. And we saw this during Paul Rusesabagina's trial. We saw a trial take place that, in the eyes of the American Bar Association, they issued a 40-page report and they said this was a sham trial. This was a show trial. It was a performance. It wasn't a judicial process. It was a performance. And I watched it and I tried, and I followed it quite closely. And I would think that was a pretty accurate assessment. So, you have a very politicized judicial system, and you're going to send out British judges and Commonwealth judges to sort of take over part of that process. And I was sort of thinking, is Paul Kagame really going to sign up for that? Is he okay with part of his judicial process being sort of basically taken over by British and Commonwealth judges?
I think
I think that's kind of unlikely, and he may have said he's okay with that, but I really find that very, very hard to believe. So I don't think that the Rwandan government remotely believes that they will end up housing these British judges and Commonwealth judges, that this is ever going to happen. I think they have decided this is never going to go through, but let's just take the money because it's very welcome and we can spend it on, all sorts of projects, and let the British system, let the political parties in Britain wrangle about this, and the Conservative Party tear itself apart. It doesn't bother us, and we'll just say yes. But none of this will ever be actually implemented.
that's very good to hear. But I think for me, I think it's the British judges who are not going to go. If they,
Yeah.
it's Rwanda, they may decline and say, no, yes, thank you, but no, thank you. But for Rwanda, you'll be surprised. He will let them. I mean, Kagame would definitely allow them to come. And
But
I think
would he allow them? I mean, you know that world better than I do. Would he then allow them to do their work
I
freely?
think I think no, the evidence will be the problem. The evidence
Right.
submitted to them to the judges
Uh-huh.
will be fabricated. But for them to have like a judicial system, unless they are running a UK inside Rwanda, that he's not going to do that. But if it's just the judges hearing cases, hearing cases in Rwanda, the he has his top advisor, the policy advisor, I think, is a United States former congressman,
Mm-hmm.
and it's not just that. I think he has a lot of non, and I mean foreigners who are running the business in
Yeah.
Rwanda. So I don't know whether the UK judges will think that is an appropriate setting because of other things involved, how
Mm.
the process is going to be, unless they run everything. But
Oh, yes. I mean, I think, Jean-Paul, it'll be interesting. I just don't think we're ever going to get to that stage.
so let's hope we're not going to
I
get there.
really, I really don't.
We are so disappointed to even see
Yeah,
this deal be given a platform, as
I
long
agree.
as it's a very
No,
disappointing for a country such as United
Jean-Paul,
Kingdom.
I am embarrassed for my country, and I had a moment of enormous cheer when I was so pleased when the Supreme Court ruled the way it did, because I thought, at least our system works.
That's right.
Our judicial system is independent. It's immune to political interference, and it came out with the right ruling, and it was a well-informed ruling, and it's a very clear statement, and it was unanimous.
Awesome.
Yeah. And what you're seeing is a political party that is reaching the end of its life, has been too long in power, has been corrupted by being in power far too long. We've seen this in the inquiry that is underway into COVID, the way the party behaved during COVID. And they just don't want to accept what the Supreme Court has announced, and that is it is not a pleasant spectacle. But it's not clear to me that they will win the day. Yeah, I mean, but
That's
yeah,
right.
it's embarrassing to see this happening because like a lot of people who've followed this story, you kind of think, okay, that's the end. We've put it to bed now. Let's move on. And instead, you see yet another law being drafted, yet another Home Secretary going out to Rwanda, yet another handshake between a Home Secretary and Vincent Baruta, and you kind of go, "Oh, really? Are we really going to do this again?" You know.
Yeah, and I did hear during a hearing when one of the MPs said was arguing against this bill, says we spent this much
Yeah.
millions of UK taxpayers
Mm.
money, and no single asylum seeker has been flown to Rwanda, but yes, yet three. Of course, we have people that you heard that. It's
Yes.
the
Yes,
three
so
home
more,
secretary,
more home secretaries have flown to Rwanda than asylum
an
seekers.
asylum seeker, like three of them. That
Yeah,
was that was
yeah,
funny. It was entertaining, but it was true.
yeah.
Like that's what I said. Maybe there is something else
No,
behind this. And remember, Businge said this is, let's say, compassion. The UK are not compassionate. It's politics.
mm,
Compassion is politics. I thought that would be very offensive
mm.
for to the
Well,
UK.
no, I mean, I watched that interview and I'm afraid Britain and British politicians are very used to the colonial history of Britain being criticized in Africa.
Well,
And
well, we
I don't
do.
think anyone thought that was remotely shocking. It's kind of like, yeah,
Well,
yeah, yeah.
wow, that's probably why they did not give it,
Yeah.
any.
Yeah, because, it's been a couple of years now, especially since the death of the killing of George Floyd, that, there's been a very critical examination taking place in the UK about the UK's colonial history, its history of empire, its relationships with former colonial, subjects. And I think we've all got so used to hearing criticisms, or that in a way they don't have the force that they used to have, these kind of statements.
Well, and I think even though you say you're embarrassed by your country, I think it's about the government in power right now, because the hope is that the country, the UK, is going to make a statement during the next election, and then you will be proud again. You know, you
I
they'll make you
think,
proud.
yeah, no, I mean, I think, something that you have to think is how quickly our leaders here in the UK come and go, how many prime ministers we've had, how many home secretaries we've had in the
Yes.
last few years. And, we do have a democratic system that means parties go into opposition very suddenly. And then they stay in opposition for 10 years, 13 years, or whatever. And I think that means that often policies change very abruptly and very dramatically. And the same is true of the states, of course. The difference between a Biden administration and a Trump administration is enormous. The same is not true of a country like Rwanda, which has effectively been run since 1994 by the same man, even if he wasn't president. Yeah, anything can happen.
Anything could happen, and and even us too. On our side, we are hopeful that UK voters are going to make a statement and
Mm.
vote this government out, even though we have no interest. I mean, we do now, but
Mm.
interest in whoever is.
Well, and just to follow up on that point, as I'm sure you're aware, the Labour Party and their shadow Home Secretary, a woman called Yvette Cooper, have made it absolutely clear that if they win power, which they expect to, they will be scrapping the Rwanda asylum deal because they don't think that this is the right way to approach immigration. They also want to be anti-immigration, but they think that the way to go about that is completely different, and it is to focus on the gangs, the criminal gangs that organize the smuggling of asylum seekers into this country, and also to reach deals with countries like France, and not to take on the European courts and defy them, but to actually become more part of Europe and reach deals, and strike agreements with European countries from which many of these asylum seekers are coming. So it would be a very, very different approach adopted if Labour come in.
We cannot wait. We cannot wait to the election. It's as if it's our own, like a Rwandan election, a credible election, Rwanda credible. That would never happen.
We will see, but
We'll see.
and also I think that election could be could be an early election.
That would be good. That would be great. That would be good. We can't wait to see that. So I know that I don't want to take too much of the time, because I know that we already over
Yeah, we
the
really
time.
did more than we said we would. Yeah.
But I want to move on to something else. So we could talk about this deal forever, but because I don't want you to decline my next invitation, I want to move on to a next subject. But I want to share your screen. I mean, your page on Twitter.
Okay.
That's fine.
I can't see it. What does it say?
No, no, I want to share. It's about the Reuters
Ah, the Reuters.
article, the
Okay, the
Reuters.
tweet.
But
Yeah.
I want to share your page because I had to take a picture to do that. But I've taken a picture actually, but I have a
Mm.
problem that I don't maybe I don't have to go there. But I couldn't share some of my stuff that I wanted to share because of some. I had an issue with
Well,
my
it was a
phone.
tweet talking about the fact
Yeah,
that the
here it is. Can you see?
okay, but which one are you looking at? Yeah.
Oh, this is your book actually for those
Yeah,
who.
that, I just have that because I'm advertising my French translation.
Yes. Okay. We should have said that, and then I will
Mhm. Okay.
definitely. The book is on my thumbnail, but because I couldn't upload my thumbnail for some reason, so that okay, this is the Twitter that changed the whole
Yeah.
organization. So this is a Twitter. This is based on the Reuters
Yeah.
reporting
Yeah.
about Rwanda agreeing a ceasefire
Yeah.
with DRC. And
Yes.
yet, they have never said they're fighting with DRC. And
Mm.
you said, so Rwanda claims to be playing no role in the M23 rebel operation in the Eastern Congo, yet was mysteriously party to a
Mm.
ceasefire deal facilitated by
Yeah.
the US. But sure, that makes no sense. So how can
Well,
it,
yeah. No,
why?
because we see this was confirmed by American officials that a 72-hour ceasefire that had been signed between DRC and Rwanda for the East has been extended for 2 weeks, which is good because it means that the elections in Congo will be easier to stage and it'll be easier for people to vote in Eastern Congo on the 20th. But as I was saying, it's kind of like, and there's been intense US interest in the pre-election run-up because they're very worried in Washington about the rhetoric coming from both sides, from Rwanda and Congo, in the run up to the elections. Because
Do you think it's because the rhetoric, or it's because of the drones that I heard that Congo has some surveillance and fighting drones
well, I think
near the
there was
border?
the fear that Tshisekedi, because he's running for election,
Mhm.
was becoming more and more outspoken. He recently compared Paul Kagame to Adolf Hitler and said he would end up like Adolf Hitler. And yes, there was more activity on the ground. And at the same time, the M23 were also being much more active and seemed to be back on the warpath, having gone through a period of relative quiet. So I think that Western donors were really worried that there was going to be an all-out breakout of really major fighting in the run-up to the elections because of all this rhetoric and the posturing. So this ceasefire, which has now been extended to 2 weeks, according to these US officials, is because America intervened to try and quiet things down, calm things down between the two countries. But the irony, as I say, is, you have Rwanda constantly saying we're not involved in the M23. It's nothing to do with us. This is the Congolese movement. It expresses the concerns and fears and needs of the Congolese Tutsi community. But here we have, Rwanda and DRC agreeing to a ceasefire. How can you agree to a ceasefire if you're not part of, if you're not a belligerent? So it makes no sense, but it's the reality. This ceasefire is a recognition of the reality, which is this is the war, in which the belligerents are DRC and Rwanda. And we know this anyway from all those UN group of experts reports that have made it abundantly clear that Rwanda is involved in the M23, is arming them, giving them orders, organizing them. So we're living this fantasy world in which Rwanda says we're not involved in Eastern Congo, and we pretend to believe them. But in fact, then the US negotiates a kind of ceasefire between those two players.
And yes, and then I want you to maybe to touch on the choice of words by the United States, because they could have said M23, tell M23 to stop.
Yeah.
and instead they use Rwanda specifically. So
Well,
what do you think is behind like the America to say
but I think if you look,
Rwanda and Chiseke, I mean, and Congo?
if you look at the words of Secretary Anthony Blinken over the last year and a half, the Americans have gone from being, from first denouncing and decrying the activities of the M23 to then calling on Rwanda to stop supporting the M23. And they then did that repeatedly, and then calling on Rwanda to stop sending its own troops into Eastern Congo. So the American denunciations and challenges to Rwandan action have become ever more explicit and ever more direct. And they really aren't mincing their words anymore. So I'm not that surprised by the wording. I think, no, the Americans have stopped pretending. They're not playing.
That's exactly what I thought, because I did see, I thought it was strategic. They did not make him, it wasn't by mistake, because they kept saying that. They repeated this a third time. The first one was the initial ceasefire. The second time was
Yeah.
to thanking them, to thank Rwanda, Kagame, Rwanda and Congo,
Yeah.
specifically Kagame and Tshisekedi. And the third time, then it was extended. It's between the two countries. So I think there is something, maybe the reason why they want to mention
Well,
Rwanda.
I think the Americans want Rwanda to know that no one believes that they are not involved in M23 operations, and
Right.
they now made that abundantly clear. And these latest statements just confirm that.
That's I hope so. So what do you think is going to happen after election? Do you think they're going to tone down the rhetoric, or what do
You
you
mean
think?
on the American side or on the
No, no,
DRC?
Congo and Rwanda, between the two countries.
Oh,
If
I
you
would have
think,
thought, yes, I think, but I mean, politics is so unpredictable. We really don't know who's going to win the Congolese elections.
right,
Uh,
right,
and
that's right.
we have seen also, let's be honest, that Felix Tshisekedi's attitudes and the way in which he interacts with Rwanda changed radically during his own period in power, in the last 5 years. So who knows what will happen after the elections? But I would certainly think that the level of belligerence might go down because he's in a pre-electoral period, and he knows that Congolese citizens feel extremely strongly on the issue of Rwanda's involvement in Eastern Congo. And so it's a vote winner. So he's definitely going to keep talking in that way until voting day.
Hmm. So I just noticed that I do not follow you on this computer though. I have other Twitters that I follow you. That's how I know you. But I'll follow you from every equipment that I have because you know. But I do have my Twitter account on my phone. That's how I realized that you tweeted about this report. So, Michela, I don't know whether you want to talk about this. You said you don't know who's gonna, how this election is gonna go, but
No, I
uh,
mean, I think it's a very interesting election to watch. I think one of the problems with the
sorry.
Congolese election is we might see quite big low turnout. That's what I was hearing. I was in Kinshasa in May,
You,
and people
in
and
May, yeah, I remember that.
and people were saying, well, what we're worried about is low turnout at the elections because there are all sorts of question marks about the last elections. And also, what we've seen is the opposition has not come up with a single candidate. And I've covered a lot of
Oh,
elections
you
in.
mean the coalition of because Katumbi is running on his own. So do you think?
Yeah, but I mean, I've covered a lot of elections in Africa. I think I covered 5 elections in Kenya, and I've
Hmm,
covered a lot of elections in Uganda, and many other places. And what was almost always true is if there was more than one opposition candidate, the incumbent won.
yes.
So it's absolutely vital to not present more than one opposition candidate. And then there are all sorts of other issues about the integrity of the Electoral Commission and the transparency of the vote. But when the opposition failed to agree on a single candidate, that's already a bad sign in terms of, you know, for people who want to change a peaceful change of power. So I'm watching, but at the moment it seems that there are going to be more than one opposition candidate, right?
I think so, but I just don't know whether, as you said, incumbent always most of the time. But in case of George Weah, I was very surprised. But I think because the opposition party rallied behind
Yes.
the one opposition candidate, but here I don't see that happening because they have their own issues.
Yes.
They are, yeah,
Yes. These are men with strong personalities, and different visions and different constituencies. But anyway, I'm watching it. I don't feel I know a huge amount about it. But yeah, it's going to be very interesting.
very interesting. But don't you think like Congolese will want to vote for someone who's probably going um, to, I mean, whom they think has a better chance of defeating M23? Do you think
Um,
that is the major, the one core, I mean, one,
Definitely a key issue for a lot of
yes,
Congolese. And I assume that's, you know, one of the reasons why Tshisekedi is definitely, you know, giving extremely, uh,
attention,
you know,
yes.
extremely strong messages when he addresses, you know, people from the platform, you know, because he knows that Congolese people feel strongly on that.
Yes, and he did challenge the candidate Katumbi to denounce Kagame and M23.
Mm. Yeah.
He hasn't denounced Kagame and M23. I think that was strategic, of course.
Yeah.
But yeah, it seems like the war in the East was also part of it's going to be a key issue in this election.
Yeah.
So, Michela, I really love talking to you, and I hope you come back soon.
Mm.
And we went over the time that we
Which,
had agreed upon.
yes.
I hope it's not too long to the extent that you won't come back.
Yes, no, I'll be happy to do this again. Um,
Beautiful.
maybe once we know who's running the various countries, you know, because there's so many elections we've actually referred to. You know, we have one coming up next year in the UK, one in Congo any moment now,
Oh, that is far out. So if
one
you're
in
talking about the UK, that's
Rwanda,
going to be March, maybe Congo. And Rwanda, it's in July.
one
So
in July, I think actually.
July
I think,
14. They
and
just
then
announced.
and let's not forget America, which in a way is an election that will affect all of us.
All of us, yeah.
Yeah.
And still, we still don't know here in America how it's going to go. We're still
Yeah.
waiting for one candidate from the Republican Party.
Mm.
And it's still also interesting because with the trial of Donald Trump in March, I think they're try to risk to postpone it, but it's not. There's no sign that it's going to happen. But March, it's an interesting month in the
Yes. Yeah.
UK. In the UK, if you end up having an election in the UK,
Yes.
yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Well, I'm not going to take any bets on it. I don't know. But people have been talking that way at the
Let's
moment.
wait and see. And thank you for your time, and Michela Wrong, everybody, and joining us from UK. She's a writer of Do Not Disturb, translated in French,
As
Assassin,
Rwanda, assassin sans frontières.
Assassin sans frontières. Merci beaucoup, et we have shared your Twitter.
Yeah.
Hopefully, people will follow you and purchase the book or read the book if you haven't already.
Okay.
Thank
Merci.
you, Michela. Oui, je vous en prie. Bon,
Ciao, ciao.
ciao, bye. Bavandimwe rero mwumvise Michela Wrong kuri kiriya kibazo cy'impunzi. Nta gahunda n'imwe, nta kigaragara ko ziriya mpunzi zizajya mu Rwanda. Biriya ni politike ndetse zishobora kuzatwara ababizanye cyangwa se ababiri inyuma. Mwakoze kubana natwe, naho ubutaha. Bye.